Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte goët.
You have worked in and out of office on the issues of racism, criminal justice, and reform. We've talked about this before, as you have with many people. Let's look at something you said to me in our 2014 interview about mistakes in that field. Take a look.
We erred, I think, a little in the war on drugs in going too far with regard to some of the sentences. It's time to pull back just a bit. We need to have proportionate penalties and the ability for a recognition that you can make a mistake, rehabilitate yourself, and then come back and be a productive citizen.
You call it smart on crime. We're 5 years later. How far along do you think America is on those reforms? Halfway? Less than halfway?
Well, you know, I'd say that we should be further along than we actually are. The reality is that many of the reforms that I put in place as Attorney General were dismantled by Sessions. Jeff Sessions.
Yep.
And that has put a real, impediment to the progress that we should have made. Now, the First Step Act has certainly been passed. It is only a first step. It doesn't go nearly as far as what we did in the Obama administration.
Can I ask you something I think you may not answer? I wonder whether you look at that and you think 6 years you were pounding the pavement to try to get bipartisan solutions. How do you feel about it happening now?
Well, you know, it's interesting because it was a bipartisan issue. I mean, I remember having a meeting in my conference room where I had representatives of the Koch brothers, the Tea Party, along with the ACLU and Center for American Progress, and everybody was on the same page. And we couldn't get Congress to do that which was appropriate and which they have now done, at least in part, with regard to the First Step Act.
Is that because the Republicans just didn't want you to succeed on that?
A couple of things. I think there was that. They didn't want Obama or Holder to succeed, and beyond that, they liked the issue of being able to say that Democrats were being, soft on crime, in spite of the fact that many of their supporters were in favor of the reforms.
I want to show you the federal incarceration rate, which is dropping, as you may know, down in 2016 to a rate of 860 from 1,000 per 100,000 adults. Does that mean that there's less punishment, but the racial injustices persist?
It certainly means that we are bringing our incarceration down and more in line with the rest of the industrialized world. You know, 5% of the people in the world live in the United States of America, and 25% of all the people who are incarcerated around the world are incarcerated here in the United States of America. I think we have to look at those numbers and see whether or not we are making progress on the racial front. You know, the rate of incarceration is down. I'd have to look at some statistics and see whether or not that imbalance, that racial imbalance that we saw certainly in the federal system, where similarly situated defendants, a black defendant would get a sentence that was 20% longer than his white counterpart. See whether or not that in fact has changed.
When you look at the cash bail system in the United States, it seems to punish the poor and minorities who are presumed as innocent as anyone else. You know the stats, but I want to make sure people see African Americans more likely to have to pay cash bail, and African-American defendants tend to receive bail amounts that are 10,000 greater than white defendants. How can that still be going on in America?
Well, let's start from a basic. Race is still a prime determinant in this country. We've not gotten to the place where we need to be when it comes to dealing with all things racial. Bobby Kennedy, in 1962, I believe it was, held a conference on dealing with the bail problem. We did one 50 years later. We called it a bail symposium to deal with this issue. We here in Washington, D.C., in our local system, only detain people on two bases. One, you're a danger to the community, or you are not likely to reappear for your next court appearance. That should be the standard, not your economic ability to come up with a cash bond.
I'm thinking about the judges who assessed to Paul Manafort. And as you know, there were people who said, oh, well, one of the judges was good and the other wasn't. But both judges assessed him as this sort of courtly grandfatherly figure. Judge Jackson said that he didn't seem likely to reoffend. When Mr. Manafort had reoffended after his charges. And I thought, would any judge, and again, I don't want to single a single judge out, but would those judges be as likely to say that about a first-time young black male offender?
You know, I don't want to talk about the judges, those judges in particular, but I do worry that judges, like all other Americans, carry with them implicit biases, and especially in the criminal justice sphere.
How do you fix it?
Well, you certainly have to have training. You have to make people aware of the fact that they do carry these biases, and make them understand that, you know, if you see an African-American defendant in front of you, that's going to probably trigger things in your mind. Unconsciously, subconsciously, and you're perhaps going to treat that person differently than somebody who shows up in a tie and has, you know, a great lawyer that they have paid for. You're going to maybe cut that person a break that you wouldn't otherwise give to a Hispanic or African American defendant. People have to be just aware of that, and then that training has to continue. But then these are the kinds of things that all of us as Americans have to deal with, because we all carry this racial baggage. I think the younger generation, to a lesser degree than people in my generation, but it is still there.
In our limited time left, I want to do redistricting. You're taking all of this experience you have and you're focused on redistricting. Why?
Redistricting happens every 10 years. It'll happen in 2021. If you care about reproductive rights, if you care about criminal justice reform, if you care about health care, if you care about protecting the right to vote, stopping voter suppression, all of those things ultimately are dependent on who is in our state legislatures. And we have these gerrymandered state legislatures. You look at Wisconsin, for instance. Democrats got 54% of the vote, get only 36% of the seats in the Wisconsin state legislature. That overly Republican Wisconsin state legislature does a whole variety of things, tries to shorten the number of days that people can vote, takes crazy positions when it comes to reproductive rights, doesn't pass sane gun safety measures. So if you care about those individual issues, my job is to try to make people understand that they are directly tied to redistricting.
So to you, this is bigger than any of those other policy issues you mentioned, because it's underneath all of them.
It's the foundation for all of those other concerns. And it is, from my perspective, this whole question of making sure that everybody has the opportunity to vote and that their vote gets counted in an appropriate way. That's the civil rights issue, I believe, of our time.
There's a lot of talk about America being a leader as a democracy, quote unquote, in the 1800s when women and African Americans couldn't vote. What kind of democracy is that?
Oh, well, that's exactly right. And that's when I hear these things about let's make America great again. And I think to myself, well, exactly when did you think America was great? It certainly wasn't when people were enslaved. It certainly wasn't when women didn't have the right to vote. It certainly wasn't when the LGBT community was denied the rights to which it was entitled.
Does that phrase echo as discrimination in your ears?
It takes us back to, I think, an American past that never, in fact, really existed. This notion of greatness. You know, America has done superb things, has done great things, and it has been a leader in, a whole range of things. But we're always a work in process. And, looking back, make America great again, is inconsistent with who we are as Americans at our best, where we look at the uncertain future, embrace it, and make it our own.
It's very interesting hearing you put it that way. Attorney General Eric Holder, thanks for coming on The Beat. I love talking with you.
Thanks for having me.
It is Thursday, the 28th of March of 2019, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, And our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, a little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Well, you know, no matter how crazy it is out in the world, at least it's opening day. That's right, the crack of wood, still at least wood on a baseball is such a lovely sound. At least it has become to me. The pastoral game of the American pastime. Oh, I love it. No time clock. At least for now, they're trying to impose a time clock. And I keep telling them, hey, you'll destroy baseball. It ends when it ends. It takes as long as it takes. It can be short, it can be long. It's all relative. All right. God, it's one of the last bastions of no time clock. Now they're trying to get a time clock now, too. Well, enough of that, because baseball is officially started. And now we can turn some of our attention there. Thank goodness. Speaking of turning our attention, it looks like Trump wants Adam Schiff to resign. Essentially because Adam Schiff knows the law and Trump doesn't. Well, apparently Adam Schiff has been lying, according to Trump. But Trump doesn't realize that what Adam Schiff is just saying or talking about are the actual terms of law. God, this guy. See, this is why you don't want a bunch of dimwits running the show, because they don't know diddly. And then you try to tell them, hey, look, you know, this is up and this is down, and they'll argue with you about it. All right, well, I call it a lack of respect. If a black woman wins the presidency, everything about America will stop, and we will be a Christian nation, because apparently Kavanaugh and Gorsuch are taking the stand in the Supreme Court. This is a stream of consciousness, just bear with me. Are taking the stance in the Supreme Court that no one can sue against establishing one religion. The American people do not have standing to sue to prevent the establishment of one religion. And we know what that one religion is. Eric Holder at the top wanting to know exactly when Trump thought America was great. We all want to know. I mean, was it great when we had slavery? Was it great when we had lynchings in the South, right? You know, was it great when heads were being cracked on the bridge there? Was it great when 4 black schoolgirls were blown up in a church? When was it great? When exactly? On the rest of the menu in the Bistro Cafe, a West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, as women continue to leave the GOP, 187 House Republicans voted against a bill that will close the gender wage gap. Republicans asked the NRA to help them block protections for abused women. Look, stalkers have a right to a gun. They do. Especially wife beaters. Wife beaters above all. I mean, ask the NRA. And a Texas county commissioner apologized for saying that the first Latina elected to head the state's most populous county should speak English after she spoke both English and Spanish at a news conference about the massive chemical fire there. He had to apologize. He didn't want to, but the uproar was a little too much for even a racist like him. After the break, we moved to the chef's table, where Rick Perry approved 6 secret authorizations to sell nuclear power technology and assistance to Saudi Arabia. You know, flying jets into the tallest buildings in New York wasn't enough. They need to blow us up with a bomb. They do. And Fukushima nuclear contaminants are found as far north as Alaska's Bering Strait. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will notice the chat room link, and that is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly, for monitoring the chat room link. If you would then take a look to the leftish of the page, at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will notice the contribute button. And all kidding aside, if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, that recurring contribution goes a long way to paying our bills and also putting money aside to buy new equipment or refurbished equipment, newer than what we have. We are in dire need of that, and the bills keep going up as they are wont to do. So we appreciate your recurring contribution at Netroots Radio. We are unable to do it without you, and it keeps Resistance Radio resisting as the founders originally intended. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do that at Netroots Radio. Thank you, Tom, for taking care of that for us. And you can follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. Surprisingly, I take care of that. I mean, who else would? And I also post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and then try to get the links on social media in that little window. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever fine podcasts can be found. Yes, indeed. Mixed in with all the rest. Okay, yes. Let's get on with this first offering here. In the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Think Progress and Casey Quinlan bring us this first offering here. The House yesterday, Wednesday, voted 242 to 187 for a bill that would strengthen protections for female workers and help close the gender wage gap. The vote comes as Republicans are trumpeting themselves as the champions of women's economic mobility, though only 7 of them voted for the bill. Yeah, well, you can't have any mobility if you take that gap away. Everybody knows that. Give them a little incentive. Iterations of this legislation has been debated by lawmakers for decades, really now, but have never actually been able to pass. The bill, sponsored by Representative Rosa DeLauro, a Democrat from Connecticut, seeks to boost women's pay by prohibiting employers from seeking job applicants' salary histories and preventing them from retaliating against workers for disclosing their wages. Well, wait a second. Employers have a right to arbitrarily use any excuse to get rid of you if they just happen to not like you, or if you're going to expose them committing a crime. Come on, you can't take that right away. It would collapse our whole economic system. It would also require the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to collect wage data based on sex, race, and national origin to better determine whether employers are responsible for discriminatory practices. Well, what employer wants to be exposed to that? Come on. Well, the House passed the bill on Wednesday despite Republican opposition, but it now faces an uncertain future in the GOP-controlled Senate. I would say it's not so uncertain. It'll be tabled and never come up to a vote, because that's what Mitch does. Now, in November, 59% of women voted for Democrats in the congressional elections. Only 40% of women voted for Republicans. There was no measurement of how non-binary people voted across race or educational attainment. Black and Latina women overwhelmingly voted for Democratic candidates. Although there was roughly an even split for how white women voted, 59% of college-educated white women and 56% of white voters ages 18 to 29 voted for Democrats. Experts say these shifts likely represent a long-term trend. But I suppose if you're in collusion with the Russians to basically steal elections, you don't need to worry about how people vote or in what numbers. Crockett of Share Blue Media brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, a little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Well, Republicans are scrambling to defend their indefensible opposition to the Violence Against Women Act. They are always scrambling. They have a certain, shall we say, fiduciary responsibility to foreign money being laundered through the NRA, and this is what they have to do. Republicans in Congress, I should add, in this reporter's opinion. All right. We got that out of the way. Republicans in Congress are afraid it will make them look bad to vote against a bill that fights domestic violence, so they're asking their pals at the NRA to step in and give them political cover to do it. National Journal reports that House Republicans held a conference call to urge NRA representatives to come out against the Democratic proposal to reauthorize and expand the Violence Against Women Act, a landmark piece of legislation that for 25 years has funded resources and strengthened legal protections for victims of domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, and sexual assault. Well, if they do that, there's going to be a lot of GOP people that don't get to have a gun. Jeez. And there's a big market there. I got to tell you, that's going to hit their market share big time. I got to tell you, the NRA did look at the numbers. They looked at the amount of convictions and the amount of protective orders, and they could lose a lot of money on top of all the money that they're not getting from Russia right now. As far as we know, they're not getting money from Russia, though I'm pretty sure they still are. The NRA obliged the GOP by announcing that it will oppose the act and that any members of Congress who vote for the bill will literally risk losing points with the NRA. Well, as far as I'm concerned, that would be a plus. You could run on that. I have the worst rating by the NRA. And I bet you a lot of Democratic voters would vote for you, and there's more of us than them. I know I made the joke about with a little bit of help from a hostile foreign power, the GOP could wrest control of all aspects of our government from us, no matter what our numbers. No. It only works on the margins, and it only works on the margins because there's not enough people voting. If we go out in sheer numbers, we overwhelm them. We surround them. They don't surround us. We surround them. Offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy comes our way by Nicole Acevedo from NBCnews.com. A Texas County commissioner has apologized for saying that the Latina heading the state's most populous county should speak English after she spoke in English and Spanish at a news conference about a massive chemical fire. The commissioner, Mark Tice of Chambers County, posted a comment saying, "English, this is not Mexico," after Harris County Judge Lina Hidalgo, the first Latina and the first woman elected as the county's top executive, addressed constituents and reporters from English and Spanish language media outlets on a briefing Monday that was streamed on CBS affiliate KHOU's Facebook page. In the same comment, Tice said Hidalgo was a joke. Tice confirmed to the Houston Chronicle that he had posted the comment, saying, "It's real simple. This is the United States. Speak English." I should do a Texas accent. I don't know. Maybe I just don't feel up to it. All right. We'll work it in somehow. Now, the immediate backlash following Tice's comments pushed him to issue a response. From my understanding, there were reporters asking questions in Spanish, and Judge Hidalgo responded to those questions in Spanish, with no translation given. If that's not the case, then I sincerely apologize. Okay. Tice also said he apologizes to Judge Hidalgo, the citizens of my county, and most importantly, the entire Hispanic community for hastily acting out with transgression on social media. Well, that's rather contrite. I think he got his behind end slapped. Tice's initial comments fueled responses from people like Irene Uribe, who said Hispanics are the majority in the Houston area. Deal with it. Harris County, which includes Houston, is home to over 4.5 million people, 43% of whom are Hispanic or Latino, and more than 40% of the people in the area speak a language other than English at home. You should not criticize people for speaking the language of their choice, said Steve Wendt, another Tice critic on Facebook. In Texas, the elected official, who is the chief executive for county government, is called the county judge. Now, Hidalgo's office issued a response after Tice's comments, explaining that as county judge, she is the top official in charge of the region's safety. As head of the emergency management, Hidalgo is directly responsible for the safety of all 4.5 million residents of Harris County, a third of whom are Spanish speakers, said Kieran Khalid, Hidalgo's director of communications. Judge Hidalgo represents all of Harris County, and given the county's composition and her bilingual skills, she will continue to communicate as broadly as possible, especially when public safety is at stake. Now, I got to tell you, Republicans could care less about public safety. Why was she even having to speak? Because of a massive chemical fire that continues to rage because of the lack of regulation imposed by Republican lack of governance. Hidalgo, age 28, was born in Colombia, attended Stanford and Harvard. Oh no, another egghead know-it-all. And has worked in human rights and criminal justice reform. Oh, a socialist too. She oversees a $5 billion budget for the country's third most populous county. And her win in November was considered part of a Democratic sweep in the traditionally Republican county. And with that, we better get to our break. Thank you, Ms. Hidalgo. Keep up the good work. All right, let's get to our break, and when we come back from that break, we will be going through weather from around the world and finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, girl power with a 90s twist. By now, everybody knows that Marvel is a universe and that all Marvel movies and characters are connected. Since Carol Danvers, aka Captain Marvel, was about to have a major role in next month's Avengers Endgame, it makes sense that we get her backstory now. Set in the 1990s and played by Oscar winner Brie Larson, Captain Marvel is caught in the middle of a civil war between two alien races, the Kree and the shape-shifting Skrulls. After a rescue mission goes wrong, she accidentally crash lands on Earth and only slowly starts to remember bits and pieces of her past. Her encounter puts her in contact with a young agent, Nick Fury, played by an age-reduced Samuel L. Jackson, who at first doubts her seemingly outrageous story, but slowly becomes convinced. There's also a mysterious Supreme Commander, played coyly by the underrated Annette Bening, who seems to hold the key to Carol's origin story. Rounding out the cast is Ben Mendelsohn as leader of the Skrulls, and Lashana Lynch as Carol's best friend, who along with her young daughter inadvertently becomes entangled in the adventure. Like most Marvel movies, Captain Marvel has a healthy dose of humor, and maybe Stan Lee's last cameo, and for those who lived through the 90s, the music and other references throughout will be appreciated, though the soundtrack does sound a bit like a 90s Spotify playlist. Larson does a decent job in the title role, although at times she comes across as a bit stiff. However, Mendelsohn, Bening, and Jackson's respective work are worth the price of admission. While Captain Marvel isn't nearly the best of the Marvel superhero movies, it is enjoyable for fans. Plus, it's good to see Marvel going where DC has already been with a strong female lead. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. One of the ugliest sights in Great Britain is a small power station outside Plymouth, England, its electrical lines and towers surrounded by a drab-colored fence. I know this not because I've been there, but because a photo of it has scored a measly 1 out of 10 on an online game called Scenic or Not. The game has viewers rate photos from all over the UK on their scenic beauty. After 1.5 million ratings of more than 200,000 photos, the site has classified more than 93% of Great Britain as scenic or not, or somewhere in between. And now a study in the journal Scientific Reports has used that data to show that our happiness increases in line with the scenic beauty around us, which might sound kind of obvious.
But what was, I think, surprising is that we're finding that connection in built-up areas as well. So it's not just a natural area that might have an impact on our happiness, but we might also feel happier in more beautiful areas in our cities.
Chinooki Saracena, a data scientist at the Warwick Business School and the Alan Turing Institute. Saracena and her team used data from the Mappiness iPhone app, which polled some 15,000 participants about their well-being a few times a day over a 3-year period. The app also pulled GPS data, which allowed Saracena and her team to correlate happiness ratings with the scenic or not rating of where a participant happened to be. The team found that as scenic beauty goes up, so does self-reported well-being, and that held true for areas featuring picturesque human-built structures, such as bridges and interesting architecture. And though it's just a correlation for now,
I think what's the interesting thing about this research is that it shows that just a small intersection of beauty into an area in a city can actually create happiness for possibly, thousands of people that are being exposed to that.
Which could come in handy, because the global population is forecast to grow to 11 billion by the end of the century, living mostly in cities, which should be built as appealing as possible. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
For an expectant mother, taking care of her developing baby means taking good care of herself. One way she can do this is by ensuring she gets vaccinated. If a woman is or might be pregnant during flu season, it's especially important to get her annual flu shot, preferably before the end of October. In addition, women should be vaccinated against whooping cough during the 3rd trimester of each pregnancy. Failure to get vaccinated places both mother and baby at increased risk for serious complications of these infections, including hospitalization and even death. If you're pregnant or planning to get pregnant, ask your healthcare provider when you should get your vaccines. Thank you for joining us on A Minute of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution, and you'll get a wondiferous pair of Netroots radio stickers for application to your backpack, your bumper sticker, or your banjo. Well, it's up to you which backpack you want to put it on. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage, because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Aren't poll taxes illegal, forbidden, unconstitutional? Well, we thought so.
My name is Ramsey Clark, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
The 24th Amendment to the United States Constitution, ratified in 1964, made poll taxes unconstitutional in federal elections. And a Supreme Court decision in 1966 ruled that poll taxes were unconstitutional in state elections as well, a violation of the equal protection guarantee of the 14th Amendment. So, between the Supreme Court's decision and the constitutional amendment, we all thought that the poll tax was dead. But now in Florida, it's returning. Last November, Florida voters approved a ballot measure to restore voting rights to 1.4 million persons with felony convictions who would serve their sentences. But now, Florida is on the verge of requiring persons who want to have their voting rights restored to have to pay any and all court costs and fines before they can get on the voter rolls. Really, you owe $25 in court costs, and the penalty is you can't vote in Florida. That's the proposal to discriminate against poor people and disproportionately people of color. A 2019 version of the poll tax.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1968. This is the day in Memphis, Tennessee, that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s final march for civil rights. If you're a regular listener to Labor History in 2, last month you heard about how AFSCME sanitation workers in Memphis went on strike to win union recognition. They were protesting low wages and poor working conditions, but city officials refused to negotiate. Dr. King came to Memphis to support the effort. On March 18th, he gave a stirring speech to a packed church, calling for a ramp-up in community support of the strike. A march to City Hall was planned to bring more attention to the plight of the striking workers. Memphis city officials estimated that 22,000 students skipped school to take part in the march. Although organizers called for nonviolence, some of the young participants were fed up with the slow pace of civil rights in Memphis. Picket marchers at the end of the line began to use their signs to break store windows. The police crackdown was swift. A line of police in riot gear stretched across the street to meet the marchers. Fearing greater violence, King called off the demonstration and was quickly taken to a nearby hotel. Chaos erupted. Some stores were looted. Police met the crowd with tear gas, nightsticks, and gunfire. Gunfire that killed a 16-year-old boy. Police chased fleeing demonstrators back to a church and released tear gas inside the sanctuary. They clubbed people as they lay on the floor trying to get fresh air. Undeterred by the violence, Dr. King returned to Memphis the following week. It was there that he was murdered by an assassin's bullet, giving his life in the struggle for black sanitation workers to have dignity on the job and the right to bargain for a better life.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labor.
This is a Radio Labor report recorded on Thursday, March 28, 2019. I'm Mark Boulanger. One of the great success stories of the international labor movement in the past few years has been the rise in influence of the global unions. These are labor organizations which represent particular sectors such as public services or education. One of the global unions, which has been in a process of renewing itself in the face of increased globalization, automation, and new perilous forms of work, is the International Transport Workers Federation. The ITF represents some 18 million members in 147 countries. The members work in sectors such as seafaring, aviation, docks, and inland transport. The ITF recently held a congress in Singapore, and one of the topics was union renewal. To find out more about how the ITF is renewing its efforts to represent workers, I talked to Stephen Cotton. Mr. Cotton is the ITF's General Secretary.
The ITF's been in a process of transition to become a more dynamic organisation with an objective of having real workplace issues driving our processes. So part of that conversation, we put together a Congress theme document that was to deal with, the future of work, but also identify prioritising which region or which regions need our input, and also certainly sections. So whilst the ITF will continue to provide hopefully a professional, supportive service to all of our 8 sections, we've identified that certain areas need more consideration than others. So for us, Asia Pacific is one of those areas where we see massive potential of growth, but we also see some inherent potential weaknesses in our sectors. So we're looking at building our capacity, and we've carried out a review of Asia Pacific over the last 4 years. Today we have offices in Singapore, Tokyo, Sydney, and Delhi, and each one of those areas has a certain specialisation, but also they're all there to be collectively pulling together in the region. And I think probably all of us would admit it's probably the most diverse and challenging regions, based on the need to, first of all, there's developed world, there's developing world, and various different strands of methods of democracy and trade union power. So for us, Asia Pacific is a real target area, so we've identified that. And we've identified that aviation is a massive area of growth and one of great potential for both developing countries and developing countries and developed countries, and then also comes into a process of how do we build power for our aviation unions. And again, it's a multi-complex sector in itself, but it also has got massive new buildings of planes. We see the expansion of aviation transportation in both passenger and in freight. So for us, we've also identified that aviation needs a global push, and so we'll be looking at that area. We're also looking at one of our other major strands is what we're describing as the future of work, and that is, again, having various different impacts in different sections in different ways, but it's more complicated than that because we also need to look at the reality of what's happening, not just from a sectorial position, but also we believe that the future of work is also connected quite closely to climate change and also to the conversation in the future about what the ILO's commission came out with. And again, what is the workers say for their own future.
And that's it. International labor news you can use. You can find our feature stories and daily newscasts at www.radiolabor.net. Follow us on Twitter at Radio Labor. I'm Mark Boulanger. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. British Prime Minister Theresa May offered to resign on Wednesday if members of the UK's House of Commons voted to back her Brexit deal. That's a fig leaf that could unstick a Brexit process mired in disagreement. May's offer has already prompted a handful of lawmakers who voted against her Brexit deal on 2 past occasions to join the Prime Minister's side, though she'll likely need many more to do so before calling for a fresh vote. In the meantime, Parliament conducted its own Brexit exercise on Wednesday, considering and ultimately rejecting 8 diverse Brexit alternatives that ran the gamut from a no-deal Brexit to a deal that would keep Britain part of the EU's common market and subject to EU rules. Brexit Secretary Stephen Barclay said those votes meant one thing.
The results of the process this House has gone through today strengthens our view that the deal the government has negotiated is the best option.
Not everyone agreed, including Labour MP Margaret Beckett, who said Barclay was presenting a false choice.
I have to say to the Secretary of State, I thought it was somewhat extraordinary for him to come to this bat box and say this proves that the only thing to do is to go ahead with the Prime Minister's motion, which got less votes than many of those that have been before us tonight.
And she had a point. 2 proposals considered on Wednesday, one for Britain to join a post-Brexit customs union with the EU, and another to hold a second Brexit referendum, received more support than May's Brexit deal when it went up for a vote just 2 weeks ago. The next steps for the British Parliament may be clear, though the outcome is anyone's guess. May hopes to present her deal for a third vote by week's end, and if it fails, again, the most popular Brexit alternatives identified Wednesday could be tested in new votes on Monday. If MPs keep on voting, surely they're bound to agree on something at some point, right? Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 38 degrees Fahrenheit, cloudy conditions. Winds out of the northeast, light and variable, will be picking up in about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Shifting then out of the south at 5 to 10 miles per hour, bringing with it quite a bit of rain, looking at a couple of ticks below a quarter inch. That should, the rain should be happening a bit more in the afternoon. Showers late tonight. Winds will be out of the south-southeast at 5 to 10 miles an hour. And overnight low in the low 40s. Showers continuing tomorrow. Looks like we'll have a high in the upper 50s today and tomorrow. And winds will shift then out of the south tomorrow at 5 to 10 miles per hour. So a bit more wind and quite a bit of rain. Pollen is rated at none. The air quality index is in the good range at 26 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is in the moderate range, though it has come down 1 tick to 4, and that was up from 5. All right. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 29.84 inches. Visibility is 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 93%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Alrighty. I don't need to hire any Russian hookers for my P-tape. It's all here in the weather. St. James, United Kingdom, which is just there in London, is reporting 59 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 58 and partly cloudy. Rome is 67 and sunny. Kiev is 43 and fair. Kabul is 59 and partly cloudy. Hong Kong, 71 and partly cloudy. Tokyo, 50 degrees and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 69 degrees and fair. San Francisco, California is 52 degrees and mostly cloudy. And New York is 45 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny as all hell. And that's spring in New York. Oh, I can smell the exhaust now. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased, and these people plan to purchase personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Timothy Gardner of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry has approved 6 secret authorizations by companies to sell nuclear power technology and assistance to Saudi Arabia. And that's according to a copy of a document that Reuters secured yesterday. And yesterday was Wednesday for our purposes here, if you happen to be listening at podcast. The Trump administration has quietly pursued a wider deal on sharing U.S. nuke power technology with Saudi Arabia, which aims to build at least 2 nuclear power plants. Several countries, including the U.S., South Korea, and Russia, are in competition for that deal, and the winners are expected to be announced later this year by Saudi Arabia. We award the end of the world to the contractor who can bring it to us in the most efficient way, and that could be us. And I can understand the White House and generally, the military overall, is that if someone's going to sell them the nuke power, why not us? And I want people to remember that with nuke power also comes a little bit of polonium and plutonium too, which I think it makes a bomb, and the polonium is just a poison to get rid of your rivals conveniently. Perry's approvals, known as Part 810 authorizations, allows companies to do preliminary work on nuclear power ahead of any deal, but not ship equipment that would go into a plant. The Department of Energy's National Nuclear Security Administration said in the document that the companies had requested the Trump administration keep the approval secret because they got to make sure market share is not impacted by the fact that they're trying to destroy the world in a flash. Not over time like with climate change, but you become atomized. You vapor into the ether. Isn't that nice? That's becoming interconnected with the universe against your will. A Department of Energy official said the request contained proprietary information because they have patents on how to destroy the world. And they don't want to let the secret out because someone else might make a little bit more money on all the hard work that they put into figuring out how to destroy the world. Many U.S. lawmakers are concerned that sharing that technology with Saudi Arabia could eventually lead to a nuclear arms race to the Middle East, do you think? Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman told CBS last year that the kingdom would develop nuclear weapons if its rival Iran did. And no wonder Trump took the sanctions off Iran. We can't sell the Sauds our nuclear technology, and they said it right there. It's part of the bargaining. Come on, you give and take. Concern in Congress about sharing nuclear technology and knowledge with Saudi Arabia arose after U.S.-based journalist Jamal Khashoggi was killed last October in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. The Part 810 authorizations were made after November 2017, but it was not clear from the document whether any of them were made after Khashoggi's killing. Representative Brad Sherman, a Democrat, called on Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. God, I hate that little autocrat. He's a theocratic. Oh, God. Back to the article. During a congressional hearing yesterday, Wednesday, to release the names of the companies that got approvals by the middle of April, and Pompeo said he would look into it, which means he's not going to do diddly. Pompeo said the administration was working to ensure any shared technology of nuclear power would not present proliferation risks. It's exactly what it's meant to do, you little turd.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
I want to assure people I don't have a knee-jerk reaction against nuclear power. I have a long-standing aversion to dying by nuclear fire, though. Or contaminants that may be floating in the air and through the water and all of that. I mean, come on. I mean, wouldn't anybody? So I will remind folks that I did heckle and harass Edward Teller at the Pete's near the Claremont Resort for a couple of decades. He liked it. Come on. It gave him a reason to show up every day. All right, Yareth Rosen from Reuters brings us this final offering, or amuse-bouche, actually, at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Radioactive contamination from Japan's Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant hit by a tsunami in 2011 has drifted as far north as waters off a remote Alaska island in the Bering Strait, scientists said yesterday, and that was Wednesday. Analysis of seawater collected last year near St. Lawrence Island revealed a slight elevation in levels of radioactive cesium-137 attributable to the Fukushima disaster, the University of Alaska Fairbanks Sea Grant Program said. This is the northern edge of the plume. In other words, there's more coming. The newly detected Fukushima radiation was minute. The level of cesium-137, a byproduct of nuclear fission, in seawater was just 4/10 as high as traces of the isotope naturally found in the Pacific Ocean, which means we've got a lot of nuclear power plants dumping that bullshit into the ocean now, isn't there? Raise the baseline, it won't seem as high. Cesium levels, some 3,000 times higher than those found in the Bering Sea, are considered safe for human consumption under the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency drinking water standards. Oh, you mean the one they want to get rid of, those standards. A 9.0 magnitude quake and tsunami in March 2011 triggered meltdowns at 3 of the Fukushima Daiichi's Plant 6 reactors, spewing radiation into the air, soil, and ocean, and forcing 160,000 residents to flee. It was the world's worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl 25 years earlier. And we're still feeling the effects of that one. Let's add some more then. Give Sauds the ability to have a nuclear arms race. See how much cesium is present then in the air. That brings us to the end of our broadcast period and rant. But we'll be back tomorrow to do the same for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. That's what we do on Fridays. That's right. Now you know Netroots Radio is going to broadcast on, so do stay tuned to that. And we'll meet up tomorrow. We will, so do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver.